Happiness can range from the more even-keeled positive emotions, contentment, peacefulness, gratitude, to the more volcanic experiences of joy, delight, and even ecstasy. In the founding documents of this country, Thomas Jefferson wrote about our unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And many books and articles are written each year about happiness. What is it, and how can I get more of it? But happiness is only one of the major emotions, sometimes listed as mad, sad, glad, and bad, right? Bad meaning joy or fear or shame, but those don't rhyme, so we say bad. The 13th century Sufi mystic poet Jalaluddin Rumi wrote about how these different emotions, mad, sad, glad, bad, that they sweep through our life. He wrote about it in a poem titled The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. His advice is to welcome and entertain them all. He says, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep the house, empty it of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. That guest may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes. Now there is some wisdom in Rumi's advice of seeking to witness without judgment whatever emotions are arising within you, knowing that even the most intense will eventually fade. As the saying goes, the only way out is through. But it's also true that some among us are more naturally optimistic. Others among us are more naturally melancholic, and others among us are more naturally even-keeled, more of equanimity. In the Story for All Ages, Laura shared some about what made her happy as a child, and that's kind of an invitation to think about what are some of those things that really made me happy as a child that maybe I've lost touch with and may can reclaim as an adult. Science has shown us that activities that are totally immersive, that put us in a state that psychologists call flow, these activities are significant, reliable sources of happiness and pleasure. But giving yourself permission to be fully absorbed in an activity without any distractions can be elusive in our age of technology and smartphones. Think of the difference between going to a movie theater and turning off your phone and watching a truly excellent film. Now, when I mean truly excellent and engaging film, do y'all know the watch test? That if you count the number of times you look at your watch during a movie, even once means it's not a truly excellent and engaging film, right? That's the test. So the difference between turning off your phone and really being truly absorbed and engaged versus watching a TV show while having your laptop on your lap and scrolling through Facebook and Twitter, and then your phone is texting and you're kind of those are two very different. One is much more immersive than the others. Some of the many immersive activities that can help cultivate flow are savoring an excellent meal, dancing, having an intense conversation with a friend, creating art, painting, sculpting, writing, photography, hiking, being out in nature, ideally, away from Wi-Fi, cooking, hosting a dinner party, gardening, singing in a choir, reading a great novel. Now, your personality and proclivities will determine which of these activities are most absorbing for you. This insight about the importance of carving out time and space in your life for activities you find fully absorbing doesn't mean you have to spend all your time. You're trying to constantly be in the zone. But it's an encouragement to discern, are there ways that you can carve out more time and space for immersive activities? One of my favorite stories along these lines is told by the novelist Norman MacLean about the physicist A.A. Michelson. He writes that when I was a young teacher and still thought of myself as a billiards player, I had the pleasure of watching Michelson play billiards every day at noon. He was by then one of our national idols, having been one of the first Americans to win having been the first American to win the Nobel Prize in Science for the measurement of the speed of light, among other things. To me, he took on the added luster because he was the best amateur billiards player I had ever seen. One noon, while he was still shaking his head for missing an easy shot after he'd had a run of 35 or 36 shots in a row, I said to him, "You are a fine billiards player, Mr. Michelson." And he shook his head and said, No, I'm getting old. I can still make those long 3-cushion shots, but I'm losing my touch on the short ones." And he chalked up, and instead of taking the next shot, he finished what he had to say. Billiards, though, is a very good game. But billiards is not as good a game as chess. And still chalking up his cue, he said, "Chess, though, is not as good a game as painting." And he made it final by saying, "And painting is not as good a game as physics." And then he hung up his cue and went home to spend the afternoon painting on his front lawn. For me, the equivalent might be to say that Ultimate Frisbee is a very good game. But Frisbee is not as good a game as watching and discussing excellent films, and film criticism is not as good a game as preaching sermons and teaching classes and writing books, but I might still go home and watch a film. You can think about what are the equivalent immersive activities in your life. Now, in some of the ways that we've explored so far for the pursuit of happiness in the 21st century, they've been relatively mainstream and mundane. What about the more extreme potential sources of happiness? Consider, for example, scientific studies into the comparative effect of happiness from major life-changing events, such as winning the lottery or becoming paralyzed. Studies show that humans generally are terrible at what psychologists call affective forecasting, predicting how we will feel in the future. We're terrible at it. Remember that opening line from the Rumi poem, "This being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival." And although there are outliers and exceptions to every trend, in studying the long-term effects of those two life-changing events, winning the lottery or becoming paralyzed, it turns out that most of us grossly overestimate the intensity and duration of our emotional reactions. Now, I have close friends who have become paralyzed. I don't say this lightly, but studies have shown, and I've seen this happen in the experience of friends, that within a year, both lottery winners and paraplegics have on average returned most of the way to their baseline levels of happiness that they had before those experiences. In that first year after winning a multi-million-dollar lottery jackpot, winners often get significant short-term boosts in happiness. They get it from things like buying a house, a new job, quitting a despised job. But even within a few months, all those new acquisitions, they become a new normal. And after that short-term happiness boost from that change in status, after that fades, lottery winners tend to return to whatever their former level of happiness was. And there's often conflict with family and friends over whether one is willing to share those lottery winnings. And that can be a significant source of unhappiness. It turns out, as the saying goes, that wherever you go, there you are. And that includes on the other side of winning the lottery. You're still the same person with all your emotional baggage. You're just even if you're $20 million richer. All that being said, studies have also shown that nearly all lottery winners are still glad they won. On the other side of the spectrum are studies of people who have become paralyzed and face an initial devastation. And just as that lottery winner had that initial huge surge of happiness that leveled out, so too paralysis tends to have an initial surge in depression that levels out. Our human brains have an incredible short-term sensitivity to changes and tremendous long-term capacity to adapt to whatever the new normal is in ways that are difficult for us to see in advance. We tend to want to return to our body's what's called homeostasis. As the physicist Stephen Hawking has said about his motor neuron disease, "My expectations were reduced to 0 when I was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus." Lottery winners tend to assume at first that they will never be sad again. And people who are suddenly paralyzed tend to assume they will never be happy again. Neither of those tend to be true. And related to our human capacity to adjust in a relatively short time to a new normal, that also means, for example, that there really is a danger of normalizing, for instance, some of President-elect Trump's erratic behavior. That history has shown us that humans really can all too easily become adjusted to horrors. As the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, there are certain things in our nation and in our world which I am proud to be maladjusted, and which I hope all people of goodwill will be maladjusted until the good society is realized. But that's starting us down the road of another sermon. For now, having considered two of the more extreme examples of the unexpected roller coasters that our life can take us on, I'd like to expand our view to three different types of happiness. When considering the pursuit of happiness, one's response might look very differently if one is pursuing happiness for a moment versus pursuing happiness for a day versus pursuing happiness for a lifetime. A euphoric, ecstatic, joyous moment might come from listening to an amazing song or going to an incredible concert. It could come from seeing a particularly beautiful vista that just takes your breath away, having great sex. It could come from taking drugs, or the exhilaration of engaging in dangerous behavior. These sources of euphoria are intense, but they are fleeting, and almost always have diminishing marginal returns over time. If you try to keep doing that same source of previous euphoria, it tends to be decreasingly effective. And although there's a lot to be said about the virtues of pleasurable moments, we need to be honest that they are often not the building blocks of a happy life, and they can sometimes carry the risk of prematurely ending a life. Now, expanding beyond pursuing that intensely happy moment, which might skyrocket you to peaks of rapture, but then send you plummeting back down into the valleys, what might contribute to a happy day? Well, in a sermon back in August, I talked about the ways that our brains tend to be like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive experiences. And intentionally cultivating and savoring positive experiences is one of the best tools for tipping the scales toward overcoming that Teflon for positive experiences. Just really savoring it, really focusing and allowing yourself to feel those positive moments. So examples can include spending time with friends, eating dessert, having a leisurely morning, reading a great book, solving a puzzle, playing a sport, taking time for a hobby, watching your favorite form of entertainment. Any one of these, if you really savor it, can make the difference in tipping an all right day or a bad day over into being a happy day. It can turn a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day into a most excellent, quite great, very good day. Now, over time, the effect is cumulative. In the words of the writer Annie Dillard, that I think she's really right about this. How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. So if you want to have a happy life, it's built up by how you're spending your days. And there's significant benefit that can come from delayed gratification, but it is a dangerous game to risk decades of unhappy days for the hope in a promise of a happiness in some abstract future that you may never reach or not have any capacity to appreciate when you get there because you've never cultivated happiness in the short term. So instead, the invitation is to consider how might you begin to carve out happiness in the life that you already have. Expanding our view just one more time, consider this list from the historian Jennifer Hecht of what can contribute toward a happy life over the course of decades. Family, friendships, celebrations and rituals that you return to again and again, travel, study, skills mastered, money in the bank, community service, an attractive appearance, adventure, serving as a source of inspiration for others. And the final two, I like these, are a history of good days can make for a good life, as well as a history of some euphoria. Which of these might you feel led to cultivate in this season of your life? For now, just as I began with that Rumi poem of The Guest House, I'll conclude with a poem titled Happiness by the poet Jane Kenyon. She writes, "There's just no accounting for happiness, or the way it turns up like a prodigal who comes back to the dust at your feet, having squandered a fortune far away. And how can you not forgive that prodigal? You make a feast in honor of what was lost, and take from its place the finest garment, which you saved for an occasion you could not imagine in advance. And you weep night and day to know that you were not abandoned, and that happiness saved its most extreme form for you alone. Happiness is the uncle that you never knew about, who flies a single-engine plane onto the grassy landing strip, hitchhikes into town, and inquires at every door until he finds you asleep mid-afternoon, as you so often are during the unmerciful hours of your despair. It comes to the monk in his cell. It comes to the woman sweeping the street with a birch broom, to the child whose mother has passed out from drink. It comes to the lover, to the dog chewing the sock, to the pusher, to the basket maker, and to the clerk stacking cans of carrots in the night. And whether your dominant emotion this morning has been joy or sadness, anger or fear, you are invited to bring your whole self to this place week after week, to this place in which we seek to build a beloved community and to accompany one another through the roller coaster journey of this life. In that spirit, I invite you to rise and body your spirit. Let's sing together hymn 354. We laugh, we cry.